You're on 121.5, the emergency frequency.
Welcome to the 21.5 Show, a podcast for professional pilots by professional pilots. Join Dylan and Max, both with experience in flight instruction, the airlines, and business aviation, as they talk to a variety of industry experts, share stories, and have a little fun along the way.
Episode 42 coming at you now from our studios in Scottsdale, Arizona. It is the 21.5 Podcast, the show for professional pilots. We've got a couple professional pilots in front of microphones today. My name is Dylan.
And I'm Max.
Welcome to another show. Max, we've been putting out episodes for not quite 2 years, but I was just looking over some of our previous...
Are we approaching 2 years?
Yeah, it's like a year and 3/4. I think we started in like April of 19, but I was looking over some of the episodes that we've done in the past 12 months. Like about a year ago, we were really getting into the 737 MAX debacle. Then we were really focusing on the pilot shortage in business aviation. And yeah, those conversations are a little bit dated right now.
We've been around the block, or been around long enough now to have seen the ups and the downs, I guess.
And they go,
our timing was pretty impeccable, really, if you think about it.
I know, no kidding. You look back at it, people go, oh, that didn't age well. But what made me think of that was that we're starting to see some conversations about the 737 MAX.
Full circle.
Yeah, maybe getting recertified.
Recertified, back flying by, I mean, the largest operator, Southwest, they're saying by second quarter of next year.
Yeah. Interesting. I mean, I guess, what do you do if you've got them all in the desert, but you're not really flying that much? So you have all these, you just park other airplanes?
I think that, I mean, they're obviously not going to just add a bunch of airplanes back to the fleet. So they will probably trickle them in as they need airplanes, as ones that are currently flying retire or whatever, because they're already in long-term storage. So pulling them out to have extra airframes doesn't probably make
I know,
a lot
but
of
then
sense.
you got to put another one in long-term storage.
No, because they have airplanes that they were planning on getting rid of as the Maxes showed up, that they prolonged their life.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah, so I just saw something the other day. They've retired a couple of airplanes recently, and so...
A few months ago, that would have been a huge story, and now it's kind of like, oh, okay.
Yeah, well, that's
nice.
cool.
Okay.
Whatever.
Perfect. So, funny how quickly things change.
Right. Dying to have airplanes to now leaving them in long-term storage potentially.
Exactly. Jeez. Great show coming up today. We've got a new segment premiere, the Flight Advice segment. We've got a great conversation with John Peroyea from findapilot.com.
Always great to talk to John.
He has that unique perspective of seeing the job postings and the job applicants, kind of. So we're just going to get a little job market update from him. And then another good conversation with our friend Tom Hauge about insurance.
Mr. Insurance, Tom Hauge from Wings Insurance. A wealth of knowledge.
Yeah. Then we're going to be talking about, if you're a contract pilot, what do you need to do with insurance, subrogation, named insured, all these different terms maybe you've heard. We'll talk a little bit about what you need to do to protect yourself.
Yeah. I've got a few buddies. I'll be texting them specifically this episode after it drops next week.
Because they're dangerous.
No, well, nobody knows. Yeah. You know, it's one of those things. You don't think about it until it's too late. Oftentimes, how to protect yourself. So I think Tom gave some really great insight. You guys are fine.
Yeah, I think you're really going to enjoy all those segments. And speaking of insurance, we should probably talk about our friends at Harvey Watt.
Of course, our friends at Harvey Watt. Still, until October 31st, you can apply for term life insurance coverage designed exclusively for professional pilots with a simplified application. This means you only answer a few simple questions and no medical exam is necessary upon initial application. Up to $150,000 for those under age 50. 100,000 under age 55 and 50,000 under age 60.
Yeah, I did. And that's for your spouse too. I did this and it was really easy and nice. Just filled out a few questions. Boom, off you go. Of course, they do all of the loss of medical insurance as well. HarveyWatt.com. For more information, we'll have a link to that application in the show notes. This is the new segment that we kind of promoted last week or last episode. And I said I was blatantly stealing this from my podcast hero, which is Ryan Rossello, if anyone knows about that. He does the life advice segment, which is one of my favorites. And I thought, well, we could do this for pilots, right? And Ryan Russillo has no credentials.
Yeah,
He's
just
just
is he qualified to be giving life advice?
Absolutely
yeah,
not. So
about
this
as
is
much as we're qualified to be giving any sort of advice.
This is the perfect fit for us then, because we also have no real credentials.
But
or
I think what's important is no matter what advice we give, we do have a lot of listeners that probably do have some more qualification to be giving advice on these subjects. So please don't hesitate to contact us if you have something to add to the advice, because we'd be happy to read that on subsequent episodes.
We're all trying to get better together is really the plan. And so if we can get the conversation started, that's really the goal. And then we'll hear from folks. So Max, why don't you open this one up here?
All right. Dear Max and Dylan, I'm in need of some advice on how to handle a situation in the cockpit. I recently did a contract trip for another operator at our home airport. The pilot I paired with was one of full-time pilots on the airplane and is about 15 years my senior with significantly more time in the aircraft than I do. Our trip had several legs, and after watching his landings, I could tell that the technique he was using to land the airplane was resulting in long landings and inconsistent touchdowns. I thought about offering some landing pointers to the other pilot after the trip, but ultimately did not. After thinking about it, I wish I had, but I wasn't sure the best way to approach it. How would you guys handle this? I'd love to have a game plan for next time, as I don't want to hurt anyone's ego. Our airport is a small community, and I'd likely fly with this pilot again. Thanks, guys. Love the show. The reluctant landing coach. That's a tough one.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's so many different elements to consider. So for our airline listeners, contract pilot, like you've maybe heard us talk about in other episodes, that's when you're basically hired just to come in and do a fill-in trip. So you're not a full-timer on the airplane. Maybe it's just a one-off. Or
yeah, you just paid a day rate. You're an independent contractor.
So what's interesting in business aviation a lot of times is you're going to fly with the same pilot a lot, all the time. So it is good in a sense when you can fly with somebody that is outside of your normal crew, because a lot of times you can learn new ways to operate the airplane, and it's different. It's not like the airlines where you're flying with somebody new every single trip.
Yeah, but so here, let's start, I think, from the airline level, because I've dealt with that there, which is easier because there's very specific rules at the airlines. And they were really focusing on that too up until I left. And that was, if you're not going to land in the touchdown zone, it's a go round. So I remember I flew with a guy that was trying to grease on landings and eating up tons of runway, and which was, in my opinion, poor technique, right? So when it came my turn for briefs, I'd just be like, yep. And if, when I'm flying or you're flying, if anybody's going to land outside the touchdown zone, I'll call immediate go around and we'll go. And then he was like, oh,
that's interesting.
And it kind of put somebody on notice basically by reiterating the procedure. It's always there. So you're not really the bad guy. Mm-hmm. And so I would find the good thing, my point is, that the airlines, you have all of the procedures in the book you can always back it up on and blame it on the book, right? And you're never the bad guy. Part 91, especially when you're a contractor showing up on someone else's turf, essentially, that's a tough time to be doing some coaching. But I think something needs to be said.
Yeah, I feel like in general, the sentiment is, if it was affecting safety, I would definitely speak up. But if it's just a technique, then I'm not going to. Now, the thing that's really concerning here, the inconsistent touchdowns, that's one thing. But it's the long landings and the floating. That's really what.
Yeah, and you'll hear people say, "Oh, it's not really a safety concern because it's a long runway we're landing." It doesn't matter. You should land on a 5,000 foot and a 10,000 foot runway the exact same technique, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Maybe your braking technique and things are different, but your actual, approach flare to touchdown should be fairly consistent.
Right. This was we got this email. We scratched our heads a little bit, so we did what any smart person would do. We passed the buck. We sent this email along to a couple of folks that we really look up to, and that's Jason and David, both at NBAA. Jason's the chairman of the Domestic Operations Committee, and David Keys is the chairman of the Small Flight Department Committee, which I serve on. I was just kind of curious at their take. So let me open up their emails. So Jason had a few good points. He kind of also had said, hey, look, the touchdown stuff, not so big of a deal, if those are inconsistent, but the floating is really an issue. So his advice, he said, have a conversation with the pilot outside of the cockpit. So maybe in the back of the airplane or in another non-threatening place. And you have to, he said, approach this from a safety and risk management perspective and not so much the aeronautical proficiency angle. And he said, you want to point out these skills as a safety concern, not a critique of their flying skills. So if you can do it in a professional way, hopefully the other pilot can respond in a professional way. And, if you're a true professional, you're always going to be wanting to improve your craft. And so they'll appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, it's all in the delivery.
Yeah.
And pilots, a lot of times, especially ones that are very experienced in a certain type of airplane and in their career as a whole, don't oftentimes like the younger dudes or dudettes telling them how they should be flying. But I think the way that I would approach this, I'd say, listen, I used to land the airplane the same as you did for a long time. And somebody taught me, and whether it's true or not is irrelevant.
Right.
And say, somebody taught me this technique when I'm landing that really helped. Are you interested in learning, or can I tell you about it? And then that way you're not really the authority. You're kind of like, hey, I was doing that too, and somebody helped me, and maybe now I can help you. And I think it puts everybody less on the defensive. And so that's how I would set it up.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. Dave Keys throws in there also kind of echoes what Jason said, and he said maybe you can ask an open-ended question to the pilot to maybe get the conversation started, like what constitutes a stable approach and landing, or what do you think is the best part of the runway to touchdown, or just something to get them talking and explaining what their perspective is. But it's a touchy subject because especially in business aviation, there's multiple things we're looking at. Because one, if you're a professional contract pilot, you're talking about your business interests, right? Because if you offend somebody, they may not call you back again. But also you want to increase the professionalism. At the end of the day, like so many other things in business aviation, a lot of it has to come down to finesse. Like you said, how do I frame this? Make yourself kind of give some empathy and say, hey, I did the same thing. I was in the same boat. Somebody helped me. NBAA is talking a lot about this right now. I've been in a couple conversations. This is something they're really focusing on, is professionalism. And, in business aviation, we don't have that professional standards committee that the unions often have. But curious what our listeners would think, what kind of advice they would give there if they're flying with somebody and needed to approach a touchy subject.
The guy I flew with on the Gulfstream for about 8 years, we always had this thing. And we didn't fly a ton. And so we always had this mentality of, listen, we don't fly enough to even have an excuse to screw anything up. So we worked really hard together to just make sure everything was covered all the time, and worked really hard, even as far as from the catering to flying the airplane, everything we worked. And so we also implemented something called the no BS debrief. And we said, listen, here's the deal. We're both going to promise that no one's going to get offended by the other person. And that way we opened up the door, and I would say, hey, look, dude, you landed way too long on that. And it's because you came in, you were fast. What are we going to do? How can I help you? And we would talk about it, and we just promised not to get defensive about it because we're both working towards the same goal of being better. And that actually ended up working out pretty good for us. And I think that's personality dependent and stuff. But we used to talk about, and he would call me out and I would call him out all the time.
Where did you guys, was this like at the bar that night if you were on a trip?
After flying.
You weren't in the airplane?
No. This was after, we didn't bring up stuff unless it's a safety of flight deal. Yeah. And then we would talk about it later to see how we could have done something better. And at first it was kind of awkward because you're like calling each other out all the time, but then we kind of got used to it, and it was like, yeah, all right, well, yeah, how do we fix this? And we kind of took it as a crew approach because we always worked together. Right. And it ended up working really good for us for a long time.
Yeah, I think that is one of the actual advantages. We talked about at the airlines, you're flying with somebody else every single trip pretty much. But the advantage at business aviation when you're flying with that same person is you can work together as a team a little bit more to get better over the long term.
Yeah, and the disadvantage, like I said, is you don't have that mountain of procedures and all of this other stuff that you can reference to say, hey, because literally everything is covered about how to operate the airplane at the airlines. I mean, everything, like everything. You can look it up, and it's just everything is down to the
what is the
little nitty gritty detail. And so you can just say, hey, look, the book says this. Do you want to go argue what it says it right here? Like what, it's just the way it is. That's right. Like, that's what I always say. The airline job is the easiest job. All you got to do is show up on time, wear what they tell you to wear, and fly the jet how they tell you to fly it. And then other than that, it's smooth sailing.
So that's the premiere of our flight advice. Should we get some production and music and a drop? And I don't know. we'll have to work on that. But I love these kind of conversations where we're all trying to work together to become better. So if you've got a situation, it can be anonymous. You can send it in. You know what we'll do? I'm going to create a forum on our website that you can send in anonymously, so you don't even have to send us an email.
Oh, I like that.
That way you can just bring in a topic that you want to talk about, and I'll have a link in the show notes to that anonymous form. And let's talk about this a little bit. If you need some advice, we'll bring in experts like we did here. Look, Max and I don't know everything. We'll be the first folks to tell you that, but we'd love to help get the discussion going. If you've got some input or maybe some advice on what we should do, hit us up. info@215 podcast.
I have an idea. Maybe we could transition away from the furlough flute to the flight advice flute.
Oh, that could be good. I don't know.
Something to think about.
The flight advice French horn.
And now for our segment on flight advice.
Yeah. It's your flight, our advice.
Oh, wrong one.
That's the wrong one. All right. Well, thanks for kicking that one off to the listeners sent that in, and look forward to more of those.
I'm really excited to get to the donation section today. This one is incredible.
Go ahead.
I didn't actually know about this till just a couple minutes ago, but Gregory M. donated a Stratix to Liz within 48 hours of releasing the show. And to refresh your memory, Liz was our bush pilot that we interviewed, and about all the really interesting flying she did. And we actually put a call out to we're like, what? You don't have ADSB?
She didn't have ADSB in was the thing. The airplane obviously has it out, but she didn't have the input for the weather.
Get the weather and the traffic and all this stuff. We're like, are you kidding me? For the kind of flying you're doing? And within 48 hours, how did that go down?
I got a message on LinkedIn from Gregory M. and he said, hey, I've got a Stratix that I'm not using anymore. I'd love to get it to Liz. And so I messaged with her and then connected them, and then happily ever after. Hopefully Liz has got a ADSB in soon.
So 48 hours. So that's been a week and a half so she's probably got it. She's probably been.
He reached out to me initially in the first 48 hours.
Okay.
So that's pretty impressive. So
that is cool. I want to follow up on that. I want to talk to Liz and see if that's changed anything for her, or it's just.
I know. A salute to our listeners. They're awesome.
Yeah, that was really cool. Gregory M., thank you. That's
really cool.
Solid move.
Keith H. is another listener we need to salute for making a cash donation to the show. We really appreciate that. He saw an Instagram story we posted with our new, I don't even know if you've seen these yet, our new Straight Talk with Ted stickers. Yeah. Just got those in the mail. So we'd love to get those stickers and some other stickers that we have made out to folks. So if you write a review for the show on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or anywhere else, any other podcast platform, or if you make just a donation for any amount on the website, we'll send you something. I mean, a Straight Talk with Ted sticker on the side of the headset, that sends a powerful message to the other person you're flying with, I think, right?
Or at least incite some interesting questions.
Yeah, right. I should make it in next time I make these, I'll do it in the David Clark green, so it blends right in on the headset. It would be powerful.
Yeah. When's the last time you flew with a guy that's wearing a David Clark? I have flown with some guys, but
I don't know why you guys bring your headsets. Just the company provides them.
Yeah, I think Bose Black would probably be that's
a
better approach.
Let's shout out Bose. Okay. Well, thanks for the donations. Again, 215podcast.com. You can donate to the show. More interesting stuff, Max. Physical items arriving in the mailbag.
Yeah, free stuff.
That's right. If you guys haven't figured this out, basically Max and I started this podcast with the sole intent of becoming influencers in aviation. I am dying to tell all of you. I've been practicing. Let's see. I know a lot of you have been asking about my skincare routine.
Yeah.
So I'm still working on those selfie videos. Those are coming up. But our friends over at Airfare Snacks sent us a couple snack pouches. Have you seen these? Had you even heard of these before they showed up?
No, never heard of them. But I think it's a good idea because I've flown with a lot of guys that pull some very questionable stuff out of their snack pack. I mean, I've flown with guys, bigger dudes, and there's just a steady stream of Uncrustables coming out of his bag over a 3-day trip.
Yeah, it's a little
grape and peanut butter Uncrustables from Costco just going down
I flew with this one guy who brought this nacho cheese dip, and he was just hammering it with chips.
Yeah, some of this. So
amazing.
Airfare, they're trying to make the plain healthy food, so they're just healthy snacks. Right. is essentially what it is. I mean,
vegan snacks. I mean, they're definitely they're going to cater to somebody that's really looking for a healthy option. They come in a cool canvas pouch, and then you can take them on your trip. And
they have like a subscription where it'll send, and you're supposed to take it on your trip and provide you with a variety of healthy snacks, which is a great idea, I think.
Well, especially if you can plan ahead and have it on your doorstep before you leave instead of buying the snacks at Hudson News and your mints. But here's what I thought was kind of an interesting angle for them. You know, in business aviation, maybe I don't have to worry about packing snacks so much. That's not something that's like a huge on my mind. But I know a lot of our passengers want really healthy options.
Oh, yeah. And you try and make the snack basket as a pilot, and you're like, I don't know what, you know.
So I was kind of thinking it might be interesting to have a few of these sitting on the shelf in the commissary, and then, if you know, especially charter or something, you get those charter trips, and you're like, oh, this person wants this. If you had a couple of those and you threw them on the plane, kind of a good way to.
Yeah, I think that would be cool. Or even if they expanded it and had a wicker basket, like a couple different sizes, and you could buy that and just have it shipped, and it was shrink wrapped, and all you had to do is pull the plastic off and slap it in the galley. That would be cool. As a core product, because I've gone to Whole Foods before trying to buy it, and you're just like, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't even know what this is.
We'll have a link in the show notes to their operation if you want to check that out. What else came in the mailbag here?
Dylan and Max, thanks for continuing to put out an awesome information on the 21.5 podcast. I've been listening since the beginning of 2020. I really like the mix of industry news related to airline careers, mentorship, education, and stories. You guys do a good job of even keeping it simple enough for non-civilian professional pilots as well. And he's currently an active duty Army helicopter pilot. Also, the Raven Careers guys are really value add when they are on. Rob W.
So I'm embarrassed that we haven't put forth any real good rotor content. We get a surprising amount of emails from helicopter pilots.
And we have some really good ideas, too, of people that we want to interview.
We have somebody
now. Like, I really want to interview like a Bristol, like oil industry pilot that flies out to oil platforms like in Louisiana or the ones that do it out of England too, right, to the North Sea. But yeah, I would love to interview those. An EMS helicopter pilot, any helicopter pilot that does something interesting. A tilt rotor pilot like an Osprey guy would be really cool, or gal.
Yeah, I love it. Well, we have one booked. So
anybody that's flown a sky crane or any of those contractors that flew like Mi-8 helicopters, like, because the U.S. they bought a bunch of these Mi-8 helicopters because they operated so well in the harsh environment in Iraq and stuff, because they're just tough Russian machines.
Really?
Yeah.
So they have them in the States now?
People know. Well, they had contractors here that were flying those out in the Middle East. Like, just there's all kinds of cool stuff out there.
Okay. Yeah. So we've got something lined up in the coming episodes, but we'd love to hear some more. It's something I know nothing about in general. I don't even know. Should I say rotor? Should I say heli? I don't know. Okay, last email comes from Matt C. And he says, hearing about the guitars reminded me of a personal story. In the fall of 2004, I was on an overnight trip to Bedford, Massachusetts. On the way to jet aviation, the captain's phone rang. I think he was still using a beeper. His wife asked if the leaves were changing. We were Fort Lauderdale based. He said they were. In response, his wife asked for him to pick up some leaves for his son's kindergarten or first grade class. So there we were in the woods near Jet, looking at various branches of leaves for the optimal color. We quickly find one that looks pretty good and put it in the rental car. When we get to the FBO, the captain is now apprehensive to walk through the lobby with the leaves because of how dumb it'll look. I looked at him puzzled and say, I'll carry it through. While I'm walking through the lobby, we see fellow seasoned 135 on-demand Learjet pilot at the counter who sees me with a large branch of colorful foliage. I proceed outside to remove covers and acquire coffee, ice, newspapers, and catering. I overhear the pilot say to the captain, "You fly with that idiot?" In response, I heard the captain say, Yes, I do. There are many layers to experience. If there's ever a next time, I'll drive the rental car ramp side to unload. But I did hear the leaves were a big hit at the class. That reminds me of the time we told this story on the air. Remember when we took our longboard skateboards on that contract trip and it never ended up working out because the plane was broken? But I think we both carried longboard skateboards through the FBO lobby in our uniforms.
Oh, I used to do that all the time. When I flew for a golfer and we would do day trips out to Southern California, and we would bring longboard skateboard. We wouldn't even get to the FBO because we would change in the plane after he left into shorts and flip flops. We'd walk through in longboards and shorts and flip flops.
Then you look like professional skateboarders who just chartered.
That was
their own
actually
airplane.
my signature move when we'd go to Paris. Because Paris, for whatever, it was just notorious for getting safe checked by EASA.
Oh yeah, right.
And so we would send all the passengers on their way and everything. And it was more one of the few places in Europe that's kind of like a traditional FBO where you can park and you can walk into the FBO.
Oh, it's not like you're on some stand in the middle of nowhere.
Two. So our move was always we would change out of we wore jeans and like polo shirts and stuff, but we were wearing the same outfit. So it was kind of obvious that we were crew. So we would change in the plane and then lock up the plane. We'd walk across the ramp and so we looked like passengers.
Oh.
So we could.
And then no one would hassle you?
Dodge the
See your RVSM letter of authorization, sir?
We don't know what that is. The pilots are at the plane. I'd go check over there. Man, flying around in Europe, that was in the G3. That's like flying around with a target on your back.
Yeah, I was going to say, I can't even. Didn't you guys have problems with like oil dripping off the engines? And
no, there's always a little bit of oil, but yeah, you can't have like fluids dripping off the engines. We would wipe them down, and we did get safe checked. G3, and we did really well. They give you a carbon copy of the thing, and we framed it and stuck it in the hangar. Yeah, we were proud. We spent a lot of time. We had the whole book, in order of the checklist and the whole deal. Yeah, we knew it was coming. It was a.
All right, we're gonna post a picture on social media of Max with his framed SAT.
I don't know where it is.
We'll have to go look for that. Okay, John Peroyea, findapilot.com. We talked to him back in episode 9. And he told us the story of how he created the website and what it's all about. We thought it'd be great to talk to him again, just to kind of find out what the heck is going on in the marketplace now. I mean, like we mentioned at the top of the show, lots can change in 12 months.
Yeah, right. And it's really interesting for him just because of the structure of his website. Because again, you can post your stuff on there, and employers generally come to that website and then find pilots on there. So it really gives the perspective. Obviously, all the job websites, there's lots of pilots looking for jobs, but he can give the insight of what employers are actively looking for pilots.
Right, because not all of them are posting jobs. They're kind of searching the users. So, okay, here's our call with John.
Hello.
John.
Hey, how's it going?
What's up, John?
I hear the music in the background.
We got
Can
you.
you?
We got the
All right.
intro
Nice.
music.
I did. I hear some intro music. I thought it was going to be the furlough flute haunting me again. It wakes me up at night.
That's right. We'll save that for a little bit when we want to get you on your toes.
That's your alarm on your iPhone when you got to wake up in the
It
morning.
is, yeah. I feel it like sneaking around behind me, like hiding behind the trees
That'll
in my
get you to
backyard.
stand up straight in bed real quick, won't it?
He's lurking.
Yeah.
What?
The
Well,
Warren horn.
Well, welcome back, John. This is
Thank
so fun.
you.
We might as well just start recording now, I guess. We're on a roll.
Oh, yeah, I thought we were, yeah. Okay.
All right. Well, on the line today, we've got our friend John Peroyea from episode 9, findapilot.com. He's back. And John, not much has changed since we talked to you about a year ago.
Oh, no, it's kind of eerie, though. I listened to the last 5 minutes of that podcast, and you'd asked about the pilot shortage.
Yeah.
So here we are.
Yeah.
I didn't think it'd be that quickly. It's very sad indeed.
It's quite a quick turnaround, as it unfortunately always is.
Yeah, right.
Yes, here we are.
So, John, we wanted to call you today just to kind of get an update on what you're seeing on your website in the marketplace. You kind of have a unique position, a front row seat, because not only are you seeing stuff from pilots, but you're also seeing activity from employers. So just curious, what have you seen from your perspective?
Well, as you can imagine, for the 6 months from March until now, or I guess it's been closer to 7 or 8 months, the preceding equal time, like from July to February, we've seen obviously an increase in traffic on the website, lots more page views, lots more job views, and a lot more pilots are registering for the website, which is typical during these kind of tumultuous times during the downturn. So an increase in pilots and a decrease in employers. And then the jobs themselves have basically kind of shifted. And this is the same shift that we've seen every other downturn, where airline jobs, obviously, flight instructor jobs, charter jobs are on the decrease, just because that's kind of where the industry gets locked up. So if people aren't going to the airlines, they're not leaving their flight instructor jobs, they're not leaving their charter jobs. And then on the other side, the increase is coming from the smaller companies, small private corporate operators. Crew leasing companies seem to kind of be on the uptick right now as well. Some of the overseas jobs are starting to come back. So it's kind of similar to the 2008, 2009 bubble, where that's kind of the only jobs that you started to see out there. It's a little different this time, though, because it seems that some of the fractionals are still growing and some of the charter is still going pretty strong. So it's a little different in that respect. But as far as the website goes and what we're seeing, that's kind of how the shift seems like it's been every downturn.
So are you still placing a lot of pilots, though, into jobs?
Yes and no. With the increase of pilots on the website, it just becomes more competitive. Each job gets more applications and each job gets more traffic as well. So it's kind of hard to say. I mean, we have had an increase in pilots using the site. We've had a decrease in our churn rate for the subscribers. So that's always a positive sign that people are using the site more. But again, it's kind of, during this time, if you're looking for a job, Find a Pilot's not the only website you're going to use. Obviously, if you're wanting to get a job, you're going to want to use every resource available and all those things that James O'Neill's talked about, that I back that 100%. You need to be on LinkedIn. You need to be on ProPilot World. You need to be on Find a Pilot. No stone unturned. So we're just kind of part of that toolbox, really, if you're looking for a job.
Absolutely. As far as the job postings, when an employer comes in posts, obviously the requirements are getting more stiff. Have you noticed like a specific trend, like time and type or anything specific?
Yes, and the insurance requirements seem to have changed quite a bit as well. Talking to employers, they're not as flexible as they used to be as far as specific requirements. For instance, there was a Piaggio posting recently. It's a small company that owns one aircraft and they have one pilot. And they're obviously with a Piaggio, it's kind of a very niche market anyway, but their insurance is actually prohibiting them from hiring pilots that they would have just a few years ago, just because of the recency requirements and that sort of thing that some of the insurance companies are requiring. So they're actually, when I was speaking to them about that aircraft specifically, really considering maybe another aircraft type in the next couple of years just to help with that aspect of it. Maybe something similar, but it's kind of hard to match an Avanti with the speed and everything that it offers. Having some of those conversations with the small operators seems like the insurance requirements are kind of strict as well.
Yeah, it's kind of like the 1-2 punch now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is that, like you said, it is similar to 2008, but that insurance piece is the new kind of wild card.
It seems like it peaked right as this goes down, and the way those curves are crossing. So, John, I have a pretty important question for you. Are you currently recording from your closet again?
No, I'm actually in the car.
Oh.
Yeah, so I'm in my wife's car. Yeah, because we don't have we're in a different house now. We're in a smaller house, and my kids both homeschool. So it's kind of interesting because they seem to sing a lot while they're doing their homeschool thing. So it's pretty loud now.
I remember that last time you're hiding from everybody in the closet. So we can
I'm in the car.
Yeah, we both done the homeschool gig. We can totally sympathize with you.
Yeah,
there's nowhere safe. You had to hit the road. I get it.
Yes, but God bless my wife because she's so great at that, and I try to help where I can, but without her, I don't think my kids would get much of an education.
Yeah.
Your kids would just be banging their heads against the wall all day.
Basically, yeah. I could teach them to code or something. I don't know.
Yeah, that'd be good. Yeah, we need that. That's what we need. So as far as on the pilot side, are you starting to see, obviously, an increase in the furloughed airline pilots? Do you guys have a way of tracking that or
like average
database
flight times or anything like that?
Is there any metric that you're looking at that's showing that?
I don't. I have the information, obviously, in the database, but I haven't actually spun those numbers.
Right.
John, you got to get to work, buddy. We need this.
I know.
Inquiring minds want to know.
Yeah, these kids got to get them coding.
I know, and I got to get
your kids are at school. What do you do? It doesn't sound like you're doing anything all day.
He's hiding
your
in the
wife's
garage.
busy. Your kids are. The dog sounds busy. You're driving around. I'm just kidding.
That's right.
Yeah, I just would imagine that obviously you're going to get those airline pilots that are the furloughed or potentially furloughed pilots are going to be signing up for your website probably more than before, especially the guys and girls that thought they had their dream job. Probably haven't done their logbook in a while.
We have had some early retirements. I've seen a few of those and helped some people specifically with helping their profiles and that sort of thing. So I would definitely say that it is on the increase. I don't have specific numbers, but certainly it is. And just the pilots registered until January, like last year, it was an average of like 100 a month that would sign up for the site in some way. And it started peaking around April and May were at 160.
Right.
June and July kind of slowed down because things were feeling pretty good. August and September were the highest at 175 in August and 218 in September. And so far, October seems like it slowed down a little bit. We've only had about 65 in the last 13 days. So it's really increased a lot since last year because obviously people are starting to look for jobs, unfortunately.
It's funny that it's September. We've been having these conversations about what's going to happen in the fall since April, May, saying get out there, get ready, and and even with all of that, I would say it's like common knowledge of what's going to happen. You still see people, the most people sign up in September, like right before.
Denial is a very powerful thing.
It's
just
interesting.
That's a total pilot trait. I think you always hear, it'll be all right. Things will change.
Yeah. Well, the other thing, it's been so different this time because the uncertainty, with the warn notices versus the actual furloughs so far, and then all the changes with the furloughs being pushed back. And then, it seems like every time you turn around, we're getting a different story. And I think it's just because nobody knows what to do. Nobody's been in this situation before. So the airlines are doing the best they can to not furlough because they obviously hope it comes back, but there it is. But it's just, it hadn't been like, we're going to furlough 2,000 and then they do. It's been 3,000, no 2,000, no 1,500, no, we're not going to at all. And I mean, how do you plan for that?
That's, I think, the challenge, and we talked about that with James a little bit, about how do you network and start applying for these jobs with uncertainty. It just seems like, man, I'm really tough position to be in. Yeah. So what have you seen, John, as far as, let's say, what you would consider a prime job get posted on your site? In the first 24, maybe 48 hours, are you seeing 50 applications go out to it, for example? Or can you just give an idea to the listeners about how competitive it is for a good job posting?
Yeah, I would say I can't give specifics on applications, but I can tell you that I sent an email out this morning. The average click to the job posting was about 150 clicks within the first probably 15 minutes that I sent out the email. And the emails I sent out weekly for the top 30 jobs that have been put on the site, we'll have an open rate of about 20%, and that's of the 20,000 pilots that are on the email list. And then the click rate is usually per job. By the end of the run, if I go and look in a week, each job will easily get 1,000 clicks.
What was your open rate a year ago? Well, it was still pretty good. I mean,
well, the open rate's always been pretty good as far as the interaction goes. So that's actually a pretty high open rate for that type of email. Yeah, that's a super high open rate, isn't it? Yeah. But it's just been a smaller list. So each year that goes by, and of course, there's a lot of pilots on the list that just don't open just because they've been in our database for 8 years or 10 years. We don't have a very high unsubscribe rate either, or a bounce rate. So it's a pretty good list, of our users that use the website. So that, I mean, if you're talking 4,000 pilots that are clicking these jobs, or at least opening the email, and then each job is getting just a high rate of traffic. So, but it is definitely higher than last year.
As far as the qualifiers versus the differentiators that we've talked about with James before, whereas, you've got your qualifier, I've got my ATP, I have X amount of type rating or this flight time. And then the differentiators people can put in there, maybe they, on the side, they say, I have an accounting degree or volunteer work or anything like that. I imagine that when you have your profile on your website, you can put in some of those differentiators. I don't know if you can look at that or see if people are filling those out more. Do you have any comments on that?
The profile completions have been a lot higher for people that are signing up over the last 6 months or so. The biggest differentiator as far as the traffic to each profile is the photo. That's one thing on our site that employers seem to click those listings more than ones without a photo. For whatever reason. And then on the profiles themselves, a lot of people come to the site and they don't fill out their profile. So employers may want to contact a pilot that has a little bit of information, maybe just an aircraft type or something. But the people who get the most traction are the ones with the most information. Before this interview, I got off the phone with a new user who had filled out his whole profile. He's a regional pilot who was getting furloughed. And we have a section for additional training. So he had put in his profile all of the flight safety, semi-flight, everything going back in his career to before flying for a regional. And he asked if it was too much information. And the answer is always no, especially when it comes to training. And if you've got aircraft types that you haven't flown in a while, even though you're not current in it, it's always good to see that you went to semi-flight or flight safety, whatever year. My recommendation for him was to keep out things on your profile, like the same with a resume. You don't want to put the 15 places you worked as a freelance flight instructor 20 years ago. Who cares? But if you were flying multiple freelance as a contract pilot on different aircraft or some variation of that might hold a little bit more weight. And especially depending on what you're looking for, if you're trying to get back into corporate flying, but it's been a few years, if you can really highlight that information, that's good. That's the kind of information the employer wants to see. I don't know if that answered your question.
No, it does. Absolutely. Well, it's such a good point because, with Max and I both being in business aviation right now, if I was to look at a resume from somebody that was a furloughed airline pilot and I saw, even just the Cessna 500 series type rating or, maybe a Falcon 50, like that tells me so much.
A lot.
Just
right?
by seeing that, even if they're not current, it's like, oh, wait a minute. If they flew this airplane, then they probably, I can
have an idea of what this side of the business is like. Yeah.
So that's a really good point, John. As far as employers go, you said there was a lot of more expat stuff that's popping up. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. There seems to be higher listings recently for some of the airlines that China, for whatever reason, I guess they're kind of seeing a little bit of a comeback, or maybe they don't have, for whatever reason, they've lost some pilots through this. So the crew leasing companies, they kind of pick up the slack worldwide. I mean, it's not just U.S. pilots that they look for, but those have kind of been coming up a little bit more often. And that I haven't seen since, probably 5-6 years ago. They were really big because that's kind of the only place that you can really get a job. And China was getting so big. Not much in the Middle East, not much in Europe, but it seems like in Asia, there seems to be a little bit more coming up, which is kind of interesting because I really thought that their aviation sector was really hit really hard, even harder than us. But maybe it's just the fact that they're having trouble getting pilots back since they probably all came back to the U.S. or Australia or wherever they were. So.
Well, you mentioned Pro Pilot World earlier, and I remember seeing a lot of posts in the last couple of years being like, I'm an expat pilot looking to come back and kind of rejoin the U.S. workforce. And it's just funny, all of the different indicators and the cycles that we see if you've been in this industry for long enough. And I mean, you've got the front row seat for all of that.
Yeah.
Like I said, didn't we talk about this last time about you were developing the predictive algorithm that you're going to be selling soon?
the crystal ball. Yeah, I think that's what they call it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wish. That'd be nice. Didn't see COVID coming.
Yeah. In the previous interview we did with you, you talked a little bit about your aerial mapping experience. Have you seen any more of those postings coming up on your site? Because I've started to see a little bit of activity on that.
Oh, you haven't? No, I honestly haven't. In fact, some of the smaller companies that like flight instructor jobs, they're just kind of not there. There's a few of them here and there, but it's just kind of locked up on that side. And the aerial photography, aerial mapping stuff, I haven't really seen much of that.
You would have to think that, and pipeline patrol, traffic watch, all that stuff has got to be going to drones, wouldn't you think? Like that's got to be one
traffic
segment.
Watch went to Google. Went to Google Maps.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, but that kind of stuff, a lot of it has gone drone.
And it was like you said, all of the low time jobs, all those people that were in them are now just stuck. So those openings aren't there anymore because everyone's just kind of in a holding pattern. So that was my next question is there any other low time opportunities that you've been seeing pop up instead of maybe some of the traditional paths? Have you seen anything
like any
else?
Cargo stuff or 135 cargo or any of that?
No, even that. I mean, that's pretty much, unfortunately, there's not a lot of low time stuff out there.
Yeah. The music stopped and everybody is sat in their chair for a while.
Yeah, basically. Yeah.
It's,
I wish I had better news for that, but there really isn't right now. Hopefully it'll loosen up once things turn around here.
And can you go ahead and tell us? Well, yeah, can you tell us when that'll be, John? Go ahead.
Oh yes, I'm predicting next summer. How about that? That's a total guess.
A prediction nonetheless.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, that's right.
We appreciate that.
It could be right.
Absolutely.
50-50.
John, for any of the folks that didn't listen to our last interview with you about the website, can you just quickly kind of explain that it's not just a jobs board, right? So can you kind of talk a little bit about what makes your site so unique?
Oh, absolutely. So Find a Pilot, just like the name says, it's really designed to find pilots. So employers can come to our website and they can search pilot profiles similar to LinkedIn, except it's specifically for pilots. So you can search for a Learjet 45 pilot within 50 miles of Tucson. And those profiles come up first in the searches. And as long as the pilot has filled out their profile and the employer does the search for what they're looking for, they can go specifically to those pilots. So it's designed so that employers can come and not actually have to post a job listing. And in a downturn like right now, that's important because they don't have to post a job listing and then get hundreds and hundreds of non-qualified pilots.
I was just going to say, like, that seems like such a huge advantage to avoid just a mountain of resumes.
Yes, it does. And also it's a subscription-based service. So within the first 3 days of a job posting, only our paid subscribers will get to see and apply for those jobs. So if you're paying for the service, you get first dibs, and that also decreases the competition for the employer. So they get less postings or less applications within the first couple days before it opens up to the rest of the group. You can sign up for free. You can fill out a profile for free. And again, after the first 3 days, you could see the jobs on the job board. But the job board is just part of the service. The main part of the service is, like I said, for the employers. We have about 4,000 registered employers. And we get right now about 10 to 12 new employers a month that are registering for the service. A lot of those don't place job listings because they just use the database to be able to contact pilots. Pilots have the choice of having a completely public profile. So if you wanted to advertise through your profile for either contract jobs or full-time jobs, an employer can come to our site, do a search, and they could see those complete profiles that or the premium profiles that are not blocked. So you could have a potential employer find you without the employer ever even registering for our site. But for people who want more privacy, they can have a profile that's blocked to only employers that are registered and signed into the site. So it kind of works on a few different levels, but it's all designed for pilots to be able to find jobs and mainly for employers to be able to find pilots really specific to what they're looking for.
Yeah, it's such a cool website because if you've ever hired a pilot before, you know what resume you want to come in before you post the job, where in this case, it's nice because guys don't have to sit there and sift through everything. You just search for what you want and then go from there. So cool. Good website.
And now, do you have a special box that Embry-Riddle graduates can check? Is that a special premium? Do we stand out now?
Yeah, no, we charge them double. So.
I thought for sure there's going to be a discount for attending the Harvard of the Skies.
We don't have any money left over. You can charge us double. We're already broke.
Do you have any sort of financing options for?
Yeah, really. Yeah, no, I should do that. Actually, it could be maybe like a ribbon on the search, the Embry-Riddle
the Eagle
banner.
There you go. You could do it for all the different university. Oh man, this could be a whole new pay tier to unlock.
I have to tell you, Louisiana Tech would absolutely be at the top.
Top featured. That's right. I remember you went.
Best aviation program.
Bar none in the greater Monroe area.
Go Swamp Dogs.
Actually, we just talked to another Louisiana Tech graduate, didn't we?
He sounded a lot more Louisiana, though, wasn't it?
Really?
Yeah.
He didn't have his radio voice on.
Yeah, that's right. I remember some crazy times flying into because it's in Monroe, right? Louisiana Tech.
It's in Ruston. It's near Monroe.
Yeah. Man.
And we pronounce that Funroe, by the way.
Funroe.
Funroe. That's what we called it. Yeah. That's about the only place to go.
I never had a good time there, but I was, we had the American Eagle in the Saab. We used to fly in there, and there was Holiday Inn, like Holodome things, where it had the indoor pool, but it was a dome thing.
Yeah.
And I remember we walked in there, and you've been flying a turboprop at the regional for 50 legs a day, and then you're dragging your suitcase in. And I just remember there was this wedding going on inside the pool area of the hotel, and the crew was walking through it, trying to get to our room. So anyways. Good stuff.
Hope you crashed that one.
Yeah.
It's a wonder you don't want to come back to the airline still.
Yeah, I know.
The experiences that you describe on this show.
It's incredible. That's right.
That's right.
John, before we let you go, got to check in on your wing count. Have you added any more pilot wings to your collection?
No, luckily I have not had to. Not yet. But I hope I don't have to. I know. I hope not. But there it is.
Oh,
we're all at risk.
It's haunting me. No.
This is our desperate attempt to be Fred from the Howard Stern Show. In case anybody knows, we're about 20 times slower and not nearly as good. But
you push the button. No, you push it.
Yeah, I don't know. We think it's really funny. Nobody else probably does, but
you'd be surprised. I think it's pretty fun.
Well, John, we certainly appreciate your time today. We'll have a link in the show notes to your website. It's findapilot.com. It's so easy to type in. Get that profile created. I've got one out there just in case. Maybe NASA will send me a message one of these days. I don't know. Just looking for
Virgin Galactic.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's right. You never know. So appreciate the service that you provide to all the folks right now, especially in this really challenging time. You got to have a lot of different irons in the fire right now. Leave no stone unturned.
I appreciate you guys having me on the show. It's always a lot of fun.
Yeah. We need to come up with some more. We had a lot of good band names last time.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I'll have to put our thinking caps back on for the next. Max is looking at me. He doesn't even remember that.
I don't even remember that. What?
Yeah.
What about if it was like, this is going way back, but if it was worn, but it was, remember the band Gore?
Yeah, like Gore. Like from Beavis and Butthead?
But it's like Gore or worn. The same lettering and stuff. I could see that kind of.
I see what
you could have the furlough flute could be part of something.
I think there's a lot of meat on that bone. We're just gonna have to keep. Yeah. I don't know. Everyone's gonna be so sick of this stupid flute. Well, actually, somebody wrote in and was like, "We need to come up with a good sound for when people get a job."
Oh yeah,
that's
just the old cha-ching.
Maybe that's what we should do. Is we should call you like once a month when you have your users getting jobs, and you could be like, we got 19 people jobs this month, cha-ching, or something like that. I don't know. We'll have to think about that one.
Yeah. Put some thought into it.
Yeah, that's good news, Johnny.
Work in progress.
Yeah. All right, John. Well, great talking to you as always. Findapilot.com is the website, and we look forward to talking to you again and getting more insights on the industry soon.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm going to pull back into my garage now.
Hopefully you picked up some Happy Meals for lunch at least.
Yeah. Right. You'll have a good day.
Right. Bye, John.
Run, God.
Well, always appreciate John making time to chat with us. Findapilot.com is the website. We'll have a link in the show notes. If you want to check it out, you can get a free profile up there.
Up next is Tom Hauge with Wings Insurance. The motivation for this interview was we got an email from Jeff, and it says, how about a show on contract pilot insurance and the differences between being an approved pilot versus an additionally insured pilot? Also, the waiver of subrogation to free you from being on the hook for hull damage. I think a lot of pilots believe they're insured just by being approved on the insurance policy, which is not the case. Anyway, you guys have a great show. Just throwing out an idea since I just went through this. And we got to thinking about that. And there's a lot of things that we don't know as contract pilots and professional pilots as it relates to insurance. So here's a talk with Tom to iron that stuff out. All right, on the show, we have Tom Hauge, our insurance guru from Wings Insurance. Welcome back, Tom.
Thanks, Max. Great to be back with you guys.
So, Tom, during these turbulent times when a lot of pilots are getting laid off, especially in business aviation, everybody suddenly becomes a contract pilot. And been seeing a lot of questions about contract flying and insurance. And so we actually, via Pro Pilot World, had a bunch of people asking questions, and they specifically requested you. And they said, let's ask Tom
you
about
fans, Tom.
Yeah, that's
turns
right.
out.
Yeah, groupies.
Wow. I'm flattered. I don't know what to say. Good to be loved.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the power of the podcast is really
it's very powerful.
So for today, we're going to kind of focus on contract pilots. So just to start us off, can you talk a little generally about how insurance looks at contract pilots?
Well, Dave, first of all, it's kind of a hot topic, actually. It's interesting that you guys had approached about these questions because I've seen an uptick, and probably in the last 3 months, certainly during the COVID period, with the airlines, some of the airlines furloughing, and a lot of the pilots that are, for all intents and purposes, out on the street, are looking for flying opportunities. And I've fielded a number of calls from individuals that have kept current on the side and wanted to do some contract flying to kind of make ends meet. So we've talked through a lot of scenarios with, setup of pilot services, LLCs, and this topic has been discussed frequently by folks in my office over the last few months. So definitely a relevant topic with current times. With respect to how the insurers look at contract pilots, it's certainly a necessity. At the end of the day, if you operate a business jet and you employ, let's for discussion's sake, let's say it's a 2-crew airplane. Let's just use an XLS, for instance. So you have a full-time PIC and an SIC. Obviously, at some point, these guys are going to get sick, need to take vacations, have some sort of an emergency. God forbid there's a temporary loss of a medical or something along those lines. And you may need to hire a contract pilot to fill in. So certainly it's a necessity. It's something the insurance companies certainly embrace. But there's some steps that you should take as a contract pilot to properly insulate yourself as, let's call it, a 1099 contractor on the insurance side when you're performing contract pilot services. It's a little more than just agreeing on a daily rate, a shake of a hand, and jumping in the airplane and showing them you're current in school for that aircraft type.
Which I might add is how 99% of contract trips go down.
Yeah, right.
Right? Just like that.
And all of that is fine, Max, until metal's bent. Generally speaking, if there's some sort of an incident and the contract pilot obviously is part of this crew, he or she may not be PIC, but there is some liability potential there. So, while I agree with you that that's probably how things typically go down, a prudent contract pilot is going to discuss with either the risk manager, the insurance broker, whoever handles the insurance side of things for the aircraft they're going to operate, protections for themselves and to get themselves approved on the policy with the insurer. So generally speaking, Dylan, it's definitely something the insurers understand and embrace. Again, contract pilots are necessary, certainly necessary when you're putting a new aircraft into service, where you've got a crew that doesn't have any IOE with that aircraft type, and you may hire a contract guy to, fulfill a couple of legs or maybe a week period of time to get your pilots up to speed learning the airplane and their typical routes. So we see contract pilots all the time in our business. And again, we see ones that go about it the right way, and we see others that just go about it with the handshake. So yeah, I'm happy to field questions from you guys on that topic and what the proper way to go about getting yourself insulated.
We'll do a little scenario here. So Max calls me and I'm rated in the XLS, we'll say, and he says, "Hey Dylan, I need you to come fly with me. My insurance policy says, you got to be sim current in the last 12 months. And I said, "Great. Okay, let's go." Now, what else should I do before I go do that flight?
There's a couple of things you're going to want to take care of. One of them is to make sure the insurance company approves you to, let's say you're going to fill in as an SIC, second in command. The first thing is to make sure the insurance company blesses your qualifications and approves you for that flight so as to not invalidate the coverages that are on the policy if, God forbid, something happens. The second thing is a step to take to insulate yourself as a contract pilot on said policy, i.e., insurance protection for the contract pilot. So going back to the first step, anytime you're going to operate an aircraft on a contract basis, I always recommend you have a current pilot history sheet prepared for whoever you're going to work for on that contract trip. I think anyone in this business has had to fill out numerous pilot history sheets, and certainly every year for your insurance personnel. But if you're a contract guy, always have a current sheet that lists your current hours, your last sim session for, in this case, the XLS, who you trained with, is it flight safety or who was it, your current total time and the make and model. In an XLS, you could list, 560 time as well. It's a similar type rating, just a differences requirement there. So any pertinent information that the insurance carrier can review and bless your qualifications to allow you to fly as an SIC. So the first thing I would do is have a current pilot history form tendered to the aircraft insurance individual that is responsible for the aircraft you're going to fly.
Hey, Tom, I have a question about that.
But
I have a question about that real quick, because if you look in the policy, the way the ones that I've had that have been written, it's not very. Mm-hmm. The requirements are very brief, and it just says it has to have a simulator-based training event in the last 12 months. It doesn't say in the policy anywhere that you have to submit a pilot experience form or do anything else. So why don't they put that stuff in the policy so it's just laid out more clear?
Yeah, and good question, Max. And I was kind of going to get into that.
Okay.
There's two ways to be approved on an insurance policy. Two ways. One is to submit a pilot experience sheet to the underwriter, and they review it, and they review your qualifications, all your details, your sim training, et cetera, and they say, yep, this guy's good to go. We're going to add him on the policy as a named pilot. That's one way. The second way is to have somebody review the open pilot clause, which all business jet policies, generally speaking, will have an open pilot clause. Mm-hmm. On an aircraft like an XLS, for instance, it might be, for an SIC, it might be commercial multi-instrument, 3,000 total time, 1,000 jet, 500 make and model or 100 make and model, whatever it is. And then it'll also probably require, in these current times, simulator-based training in the last 12 months for the make and model, so specifically for the XLS. So provided you meet, as a contract pilot, all of those conditions to the letter, including the training, the minimum times for jet experience, make and model, total time, you don't even need to notify the insurance company. You can jump in that seat, fly the airplane with the full-time PIC, and you're good to go. However, I generally don't suggest you go that route, because if you're short on any of those qualifications, or for instance, you did your recurrent training in an XL, which is not an XLS, there's a differences course that's required for the XLS. And somebody says, oh, you're good to go. Yeah, you did the training, and God forbid something happens and the SIC's at the controls. Let's say the aircraft goes off the runway somewhere. The SIC was flying. The insurance adjuster peels back the onion on after the loss and says, send me your latest training files. And they determine, oh, hey, your recurrent training in the last 12 months was not in the XLS. You didn't do differences. It's in the XL. They have grounds to deny coverage. So it's a thing. It's an area that I strongly encourage. Spend the extra few minutes, fill out the pilot form, send the pilot form into the insurance broker, and have them specifically add you on the policy as a named pilot. That gives you surety that the insurance underwriter reviewed your qualifications and they blessed having you added to the policy. That way there's no questions if something were to happen while that SIC was flying the airplane. That's what I highly, highly encourage.
Okay,
now,
and that process takes that for the operator, for the chief pilot to send that in. I mean, is that something that's typically is going to happen, and you send that email in, you'll get another email back in a few hours, or does this take like a week to get done, or how should folks prepare for that?
Good question, Dylan. Actually, most insurance brokers can turn that request around in a day's time.
Okay.
It's again, if there's a current pilot history form that the insurance broker has on file from the contract pilot, they ship that into the underwriter. They look at it, review it, and put the stamp on it, and you're good to go. It's again, within a day's time, you should be able to get that blessed. That shouldn't be a challenge. Now, the flip side of that, guys, is let's say it's a Friday evening and insurance is closed. Everybody's closed, broker, underwriter, and your SIC is sick. Let's say you're the PIC and you've got a buddy that, is a contract pilot and he can fill in, he's available, but there's no way you can get a hold of the underwriter. There's, everything's closed. This is after hours or it's on a weekend, for instance. In that case, the pilot needs to meet the letter of the open pilot clause exactly. And if they do, then you're good to go. That's really what the open pilot requirements are for. It's for that after hours, for that weekend, for, maybe one trip to reposition an airplane out of maintenance where that pilot's never going to be used again. And, the insurance company doesn't want to go through the administrative hassle of vetting a pilot form, endorsing a policy, adding a pilot, et cetera. That's what that open pilot clause is for, some flexibility. In the past, and I can't say this is common anymore, on an aircraft like the XLS, 3-4 years ago when the insurance market was really soft, it wasn't uncommon to have a provision in the policy where the PIC could approve the SIC.
I remember those days.
And those are even still out there, but very infrequently. I know a buddy of mine had to pay significantly more to keep that SIC open like that. And I think you also have to have a pretty low hull value too, right?
Yeah, certainly it helps. No two policies are the same, but there's certainly a little more latitude or flexibility when you're talking about a lower valued asset than you are with a.
Yeah, I was just surprised because I thought that had totally ridden off into the sunset, but
it's still fairly common, Max, with large management companies and fleet operations. Part 91 management companies and maybe large charter companies. Most of those guys where they have multiple fleet types that pilots hop between, two different models, they will allow the operator flexibility to approve the SICs. However, it is becoming increasingly uncommon that if it's a single ship, one aircraft policy, those flexibilities are pretty much gone, at least in the current market, as of the last couple of years, with the changes in the market, the premiums going up, limits are getting very tight, and pilot approvals are also getting very tight. So, going back to prudent course of action for a contract pilot, any time you have the opportunity with time, and at least a day, always get yourself submitted formally to the insurer and have yourself added as a named pilot on the policy, especially if you're going to fly the airplane more than just that one time. If they're going to use you for subsequent vacations and sick time, and you may have the opportunity to fly it, more than just one trip, I highly encourage you to get added on the policy.
That makes sense. One other question, Tom, on the operator side, if you do add someone, a named insured to the policy, is there typically a fee for that? Should guys expect to pay something, or is that just kind of a courtesy through the broker?
Actually, I'm glad you asked that question because it's probably one of the three most commonly misunderstood terms in aviation insurance. The term named insured versus named pilot. They're completely they're two separate, completely different connotations.
I did that on purpose. I totally did that on purpose.
Very clever, Dylan.
Yeah.
So for instance, Dylan, if you get yourself added onto a policy as a named pilot, quote unquote named pilot, that affords you zero insurance protection. Zero. All that does is it allows the operator, again, the company's vetted your qualifications and approved you to operate the airplane. If you screw up and something happens, their coverages are still in force.
Gotcha.
But it doesn't afford you coverages as a named pilot. I always suggest think if the word insured is not in the terminology that you're given, there's no insurance. So for instance, if somebody says, I'm going to add this contract pilot as an additional insured, now you're getting coverage, you're getting insurances in your favor if something happens. If they say, I'm going to add you as a named pilot, there's no insured in that connotation. That means there's no insurances available to you. A lot of people think, oh, I'm a named pilot, I'm covered. No, you're not covered. You're simply approved to operate the airplane and allow coverage for the owner of the aircraft not to be void if you screw up. So that's key when you're requesting to be on a policy. And that was kind of the second part of my long answer here. You always want to ask, if you're a contract pilot, there's two things you want to ask for. One is be an additional insured, and number two is be granted a waiver of subrogation. Most guys flying contract right now, I shouldn't say most, I don't mean to generalize, but most of the guys that I'm seeing that are incorporated, if you will, and they're doing routine pilot services are doing so under an LLC they've set up. So John Doe Pilot Services LLC, let's say, they have a nice written agreement that specifies their daily rate. It'll also have an insurance section in there that says operator must add John Doe Pilot Services as an additional insured and endeavor to provide a waiver of subrogation. So what the additional insured is let's say you're flying an XLS as a contract pilot and the policy carries $50 million in liability. When you request to be an additional insured on that policy, you are now sharing in that liability protection. Therefore, you're granted insurances. Again, that's a customary request. There shouldn't be a charge to ask for that. And I'm assuming most of your listeners are, in the business jet category here. We're talking about, jet aircraft, not pistons. But so again, asked to be additionally insured. There's insured in the title. You're granted insurance protection if you screw up and you are sued by a third party or a passenger or somebody like that. The waiver of subrogation, which is the second half of that request, doesn't allow the insurance company to subrogate a claim back against the contract pilot. So the XLS hires the contract guy. He gets listed on the policy as an additional insured. He's given a waiver of subrogation by the insurance company. He takes the first leg on the contract trip, and it's low vis, and he taxis the airplane into the mud. The insurance company in that case cannot come back after the SIC that was negligent, causing damage to the airplane, and subrogate the loss because he has a waiver. There's a waiver in place. So they cannot subrogate that back against the pilot. It protects the pilot. So again, it's in the pilot's best interest to request that. I will say in not all cases will it be granted. It's one of those things you want to ask for it, but expect you may get some pushback from certain insurance carriers depending on the situation. But if I was doing contract flying, I would have a formal written agreement that would have an insurance section in there, would have those two provisions in there, would specify my daily rate, my expenses to be paid, et cetera, et cetera. And lastly, when you request these things from the insurance person that handles the aircraft, you should be given what's called a certificate of insurance. So when you request additional insured waiver, you should get a piece of paper that says John Doe Pilot Services is listed on said policy as an additional insured with a waiver of subrogation. That's your surety that the insurance companies endorsed the policy, added your interest, and offered those protections that you requested. I would not take earwash from a broker via an email. Oh yeah, don't worry about it. We'll take care of it. Don't take that as gospel. I mean, you're going to want a piece of paper that shows that you are listed on the policy. Your pilot services company is an additional insured. There's a waiver of subrogation, et cetera.
Hey, Tom, in a lot of your examples, you say like you're the SIC contract guy and you taxi the airplane into the mud or whatever. But if you're the SIC and you're not flying, does that absolve you from any of these things? Is it more risky to actually fly and manipulate the controls than it is to just sit there and put the gear up?
No, it would be pretty remote, Max, that if you're just, again, the PIC, as you know, per the FARs, is solely responsible for safe operation of the aircraft and conducting the flight. So, even if the SIC's at the controls, ultimately it's the PIC's, responsibility. I haven't seen any case law recently anyways, that an SIC that was not flying was either subrogated against or deemed liable for any kind of, substantial loss. So, if you're part of the crew, yes, you do have some liabilities there. You're a required crew member, but ultimately the PIC, as per the FARs, is responsible for the flight. So, again, those protections, even if you're not at the controls at the time of the loss, having those protections on that policy is your insulation blanket if something were to happen. So it's easy to blow this off because it's paperwork and it seems like it's a little bit of a hassle to do at the, a day or two before your trip. But at the end of the day, if metal is bent or there's some sort of an issue, you'll be able to sleep at night knowing that A, you've got insurance protection from the policy, and B, the insurance carrier that insures the aircraft can't come back after you.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, getting back to our scenario, I'm the contract pilot. Max is the operator. I'm going to go fly for him. I'm smart. I've listened to your advice. I request to become insured and the waiver of subrogation, which is a great band name also, by the way, I think. And Max goes and emails his broker to get those things done. Should he expect a change in the premium? Should he expect is there a customary fee? Can you talk a little bit about that?
No. Yeah, absolutely. In this class of aircraft, let's call it, either light, midsize, or large cabin business jets. I've not seen any kind of a fee, frankly, ever imposed for a qualified fill-in contract pilot. Overall, if we're talking about light general aviation type aircraft, which is probably not the focus of maybe most of your listeners, but like a little light Piper Seneca or something like that, there could be a situation where if you were a fill-in pilot and your qualifications were below what the policy was rated on. So, for instance, if it was a light Piper Seneca and the primary pilot on the policy was a 5,000-hour ATP, and he got sick and they hired a 1,200-hour guy with a lot less multi-time, absolutely, that could generate a requirement, for checkout in the airplane, and it could levy some small premium change as well. But generally speaking, business jet class aircraft that require formal simulator school, they're either going to say, no, we're not going to add you because your qualifications don't work, or yes, we'll add you. There's generally not a charge associated with adding a pilot, even on a contract basis.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, just one kind of follow-up, and you mentioned this a little bit earlier. I think our conversation really applies to the smaller, one or two airplane operators that maybe have their own policy. Can you talk a little bit about a fleet policy? Maybe you're going to go do a trip for like an EJM or Solaris or Jet or one of the bigger fleets. Can you still get that named insured and the waiver of subrogation? Is that required?
Yep. Absolutely. And like I had mentioned earlier, where we were talking about fleet operators or large management companies, 91 management companies, charter companies, somebody that's got a substantial fleet, 10, 15, 30, 50 airplanes. Generally, those policies are structured to allow the operator more flexibility than you would in your one ship flight department.
Okay.
Meaning, like I said earlier, they can usually vet internally and approve their second in commands. But yes, the request still holds true. You still have the same liabilities and same exposure flying a Solaris or an EJM or, what have you, aircraft under contract than you do as flying, somebody local one aircraft flight department. So there's no reason that request should be declined just because it's a fleet operator or otherwise. In fact, they may be able to issue the certificate in-house. Their broker may be able to issue the certificate in-house and approve the additional insured waiver rather than with a one aircraft flight department that actually has to come from the underwriting company. So no, it doesn't void the request, Dylan, as far as getting those protections. It's still valid. You still have the same exposures. The aircraft are the same. You've got the same probability of a loss and with that operator as you do on a single ship. So no, I wouldn't. I would certainly make sure you hold your foot down with making sure you get that documentation.
Right. That makes sense. One other specific listener question that we had that kind of ties into this, I'll just read it here. It says, if a pilot is not aware of and doesn't meet the pilot experience requirements, what liabilities are realized? Can the pilot be subject to subrogation in the event of a claim?
Absolutely. But again, there's some caveats to that. I don't know a lot of pilots with deep pockets.
Especially right now.
Tongue in cheek. Yeah, especially right now. So, generally when there's an aircraft accident, there's a lot of links in the chain in terms of who's named in the pending lawsuit after the aircraft's wrecked. You've got the operator, you've got the maintenance facility that last turned a wrench on the airplane. And I think somewhere down at the bottom, you're going to have the pilots listed. Going after a contract SIC, you're not going to get much juice out of that orange. Certainly there's some liabilities there. And generally speaking, contract pilots don't carry their own insurances like you would expect from your plumber or electrician. if they're going to work on your utilities at your home, you expect them to be insured. I mean, most folks do. In the contract pilot space, though, it's very, very uncommon to see a contract pilot or freelance contract pilot have his own insurances. And there's a couple reasons for that. Number one, it's extremely difficult to come by. And number two, it's very pricey. I've come across one contract pilot in probably the last 5 years that brought to the table his own insurance policy. I was blown away. I actually had to look at it twice and question him, but just very diligent guy. And he had set up his own workers' comp, and he had set up his own general liability. And I mean, it was impeccable. I've seen it one time.
Hey, Tom.
Generally speaking, go ahead.
I was going to say, can't sometimes if you have an umbrella policy in place, that provides some coverages in this kind of instance?
Most of the umbrellas that we've come in contact with, Max, exclude aviation.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I get that question a lot from the owner-operators in business jets, where they're low-time pilots and they can't get more than $1 million or $2 million liability. And their comments always, well, I've got an umbrella for $100 million. That'll protect me. And I always send them to their insurance guy and say, you might want to double check. And sure enough, 9 times out of 10 or 10 times out of 10, it excludes aviation.
Really?
So if you've got an umbrella to cover your cars, your house, your whatever you have for assets, check that avenue. But it'd be extremely rare that type of coverage would layer over pilot services or an aviation exposure, period. So yeah, not common in that regard. But, getting back to the point of procuring your own insurances, it's a lot easier for a plumber to go to the local insurance, agent and say, hey, I'm a plumber. I need liability coverage. That's on every street corner. Those guys can buy that type of coverage. It's not that hard to come by, and it's frankly the cost of doing business. In the contract pilot space, there's not very many insurers, period, underwriting aviation. Right now, there's about 14 total in the entire United States, and I can think of one or two that might even take a sniff at a contract pilot liability policy. Further, the premiums that you're going to see for any decent amount of liability is going to be a 5-figure number. So, most guys that have looked into this, balk at it. I mean, I've quoted a couple that were $10,000 or $15,000 a year for $1 million or $2 million in liability or something like that. Maybe it was 5, but nonetheless, they balked at the cost of it. So not only is it scarcely available, it's very expensive to purchase. So, it's customary in this class of aircraft, XLSs, Lears, Gulfstreams, and Falcons. Most of these policies carry at a minimum $50 million or $100 million. And when you get on that policy as an additional insured, as we suggested earlier, you're sharing in that limit. So, you've got to share in a $50 million protection of blanket of protection versus buying $2 million for $10,000 on your own. I don't know many that have found that equation to be favorable, that they need to carry their own.
We'll send them all your way, though.
What's kind of interesting about that, Tom, is that would seem to indicate that being a contract pilot is very risky activity. If an insurer, most of them don't want to even offer the policy, and if they do, it's very expensive. What's your comment on that? Yeah,
it's at the end of the day, and I hate to say this because I don't want to speak bad about the insurance underwriters. I mean, they're excellent people and they do a fine job. But most of these companies aren't going to get out of bed for a policy that's less than $5,000. Let's face it, especially in the turbine world like this. And lately, it's been 10,000 has been a minimum number. So it's almost an administrative for them hassle to underwrite these policies. I wouldn't say that we've seen any kind of a high probability of payouts that would indicate that they're pulling back from even quoting them. I don't think that's the reason. It's just really low fruit, and it's not something they've dedicated a line of business to. The ones that we've placed to date, they've been done as an accommodation or a favor. That they'll, most of the guys that have purchased it or that I've seen have or inquired about it are operating large cabin intercontinental airplanes. And they may be part of a larger pilot group. They have a storefront. They're operating as a pilot services firm, and they've got, 8 or 10 pilots, and they bought a policy to cover their company and all the pilots within. Very rare that you'll see a single individual, Gulfstream 5 captain, for instance, go out and buy his own coverage. It's just very, very rare. Just again, sense. The cost and the availability is just not there.
If I'm a contract pilot Is there any difference from a liability standpoint of just doing this under my name or doing it under a Pilot Services LLC? Is there any protections? Do you know enough about that to comment on that?
I think you've had an aviation attorney on your podcast before, or certainly an aviation tax guy. They're probably better qualified, but I can tell you from a liability standpoint, maybe that's what your direct question is.
Yep.
There's really no more insulation provided contracting through an LLC versus just your name. And again, the reasons for that are mostly either best communicated via an aviation attorney or via an aviation tax person. There's reasons to set up an LLC that are outside of liability.
Sure.
I've heard it explained by some prominent aviation attorneys in the space. All the LLC does for you is hang a single ply sheet of toilet paper in front of a punch. It does nothing. It does absolutely nothing for you as far as protecting your face. And again, that's exactly how they explained it. So, again, that's probably a question best directed to one of those other resources to get, outside of liability. There may be some tax reasons to do that or other reasons, but it's generally not going to protect you at a higher degree versus just contracting under your name.
Last one, Tom, on this. Is age becoming a bigger factor in aviation insurance as far as getting guys approved?
Oh, absolutely. I have not seen age as big of a factor as it is present right now. And I'm not going to name names, but there's been several insurance companies that have kind of changed their position on age in the last, let's call it, 8 to 10 months. There's been a lot of, age-related non-renewals of, light aircraft policies. I can tell you age does not mix well with high hull value aircraft. So, if you're a 70 plus, year old contract pilot, your days are limited. And I talk to these guys quite frequently and I'm probably not very reassuring, but my comments always, if you were an airline guy, you would have been retired 5 years ago forcibly. So consider yourself lucky that you've got an extra 5 years of flying, before you're starting to get a lot of scrutiny from the underwriting side. But yes, Max, absolutely. Age is starting to become a big issue with the cost of these aircraft. I mean, the hull values continue to escalate. And especially if it's a single pilot operation, you can generally get away with an older SIC nowadays. So somebody that's approaching 70, maybe just a few years older. But as soon as you stick a guy PIC in a very high value business jet, a lot of underwriting scrutiny, and a lot of these guys are getting kicked out, meaning, the insurer is not willing to cover them any longer. They're giving them a hard and fast date. I've had a number of policies where the insurer said, we're not going to offer renewal terms next year because this pilot is approaching 75 or whatever it may be. So, our objective then is we've got to find a new home for the policy if they want to keep the pilot. And a lot of times it boils down to, unfortunately, replacing the pilot.
So is there a line in the sand at 65 or 70, or does it seem to fluctuate?
Things start to get a little tighter. I mean, the airlines have the best safety record, hands down. And, the insurance companies, the aviation insurance companies like to see GA kind of emulate the airlines and how they do things. Obviously, the safety record speaks for itself. But, I think after age 65, which again is mandatory retirement in the airline world, they just start looking at things a little closer. It's what's your class of medical? Are you maintaining a first class after age 65? How much are you flying a year? Are you just putting in 60 hours or are you still flying a 200-hour schedule? A lot of the other underwriting factors, they take a look at a little bit closer after you eclipse 65. That's not saying that after age 65, you're uninsurable. That's just saying they're just getting a little tighter in terms of who they'll underwrite under what type of policies and what kind of liability limits and what hull. So I would say by and large, 65 to 68, 69. Once you hit 69, 70, you're going to start seeing some insurance pushback in certain areas or scrutiny.
I think for any of our listeners that are airline pilots right now, after hearing this, hopefully you understand like how much insurance is driving business aviation right now. We discussed it last time with you too, Tom, but I mean, the regs say one thing, but man, the insurance is just driving.
It's usually more restrictive.
Yeah. And it's just, I mean, I was just going to say, this is the huge, Max and I were just talking about this. We had a downturn similar to this in 2008 with tons of pilots on the market looking for work, but the insurance market was much softer then. And now this is like the perfect storm of a hardened market plus an oversupply of pilots, just more challenges.
Yep. Yeah, it's, I got to be honest, it's not been a fun environment to work in the last year. It's, it's very challenging delivering bad news and unexpected news daily, multiple times. But, as long as you're educated on things and you take the right steps and, we talked about protecting yourself, when flying under contract and whatnot, it's, you just kind of have to kind of roll with it. Eventually things will change. There's a backside of the curve here, but it's not forecast to get any more lax, if you will. I hate to use that word, but for at least another year and a half. So it's, like I said, it's been a very challenging climate to operate in for us, because we're ultimately the messenger. The broker is the messenger of the news to the insured party and delivers the yes or no's and everything else. But you made a comment earlier too, which I just wanted to comment quickly on. One of the other misconceptions too that I hear all the time is FARs and insurance. They are two separate streets. They do not intersect, meaning you have to be in compliance with the FARs and you also have to be in compliance with what the insurance says. Case in point, take a Pilatus PC-12 policy. The FARs don't require you to go to annual school for that airplane. It's under 12.5. There's no type rating requirement. However, if you peel back the policy, you're going to have to go to school every 12 months. And depending on the policy, it may have to be a simulator-based school, or they may allow you to train in the airplane. But that's a policy requirement. It's not an FAR. And again, with the FARs, you take a 6158 check. A lot of folks think that as long as they do a 6158, they're good with insurance. Not true. 6158 satisfies the FAA and the FAR. The insurance will specify specifically training in the make and model that you're operating within 12 calendar months that you must do sim school. You can do a 6158 in an airplane in probably half a day, complete the whole thing. That, in most cases, will not satisfy your insurance company. The insurance company wants to see formal, annual, recurrent training. That means it's usually a 2 or 3 day course. They may do a 6158 as part of that, but it's completely separate from what the FAA requires. So that's one topic that is commonly misunderstood. Folks just assume that because they meet the FAR, that insurance is going to approve it. And in a lot of cases, it does not. You do not want to find out that you didn't meet your policy requirements after you have an issue.
That's really well said, Tom. And I can't emphasize enough, as a former airline pilot, how little I knew about insurance. You never have to think about it as an airline pilot. And in our world, in business aviation, it's a huge factor. And I think that for those folks that are getting furloughed, or the people that are maybe retiring and looking for work, they just don't understand the marketplace now. And the guys that say, I'm going to retire and I'm going to go buy a type rating and go fly and be a contract, those days are very,
even if you're going to buy your own airplane, I mean, aviation insurance from a Piper Cub to a 747 is tough right now. And it's a big deal.
Yeah, it's a completely different. I mean, it's just all lends to getting good representation. Working with I'm not. This isn't a shameless plug for myself or any other broker, but you want to have somebody. You want to have somebody that can explain this to you. Go through the intricacies of what you're trying to do. If it's contract pilot services or operate a training company or whatever, because there's a lot of loopholes here. And like you said, Dylan, in the airline world, everything is handed to you. When you're flying a business jet that has an insurance policy, all of these things have to be taken care of by yourself. No one's doing this for you. So again, it's good to have all this out in front, have good representation, somebody that can explain the ins and outs of the policy and coverages and how you can be protected and all that. So very, very important topic.
Last question, Tom. So the overall market, since we spoke to you last, 4 months
it was
ago,
in like January. It seems like 7 lifetimes ago.
So has it been tightening up more? Is it kind of plateaued, getting better, which I think is unlikely? Any segments that are really kind of poked their heads up that are more noticeable than others?
Yeah, I've seen there's impact in all segments, Max. I mean, whether you're operating a Piper Arrow, an old Piper Arrow versus a CJ4, there's impact to everyone. It's rare that you'll come across somebody that they got any kind of a reduction on their policy, or even a flat renewal with no change. So the changes are more pronounced in the higher valued asset. We talked about asset values earlier. We're seeing bigger changes on single pilot turbine equipment more than any segment. Commercial segments, whether they're flight schools, management companies, charter operators, whatever, where they're, depending on the type of operation, they're seeing anywhere from 25 to 50% increases in premiums. So there's really no change. There is a little bit of loosening that I've seen anyways in the 5 million and under whole value. So, that's kind of nice, because that, if you're talking GA, that helps with the M2, the new M2 sales, that helps with the new TBM 940 sales. Those aircraft are comfortably under 5 million. So there's still been some, I'm not going to say deals, but there's been some insurance carriers that have expanded their limit offerings. So we've been able to get some, policies underwritten for reasonable premiums in this market. But by and large, the answer to your question is no. There isn't a market improvement over the last, since we spoke last. And just listening to a couple of my industry colleagues from Allianz, Global Aerospace, and USAIG here on an MBAA, an HAI podcast here a week ago, all of them kind of reiterated that the hard market conditions will at least last through 2021. So, don't expect any light at the end of the tunnel for at least another, 16 months or so, 14 months.
Well, I think that covers all of our questions. If folks want to get a hold of you, if they've got any more questions or need any more guidance, what's the best way to do that?
We've got a pretty robust website, www.wingsinsurance.aero, Alpha Echo Romeo Oscar. I entertain questions all the time, and happy to field any kind of questions from your listeners, whether they're actually getting a quote for somebody or simply just, providing more clarity on what we discussed today. I'm happy to answer questions.
Good deal, Tom. Well, appreciate it as always.
We'll talk to you when your groupies have more questions for you. We'll be sure and
we'll let you know.
Sounds good, guys.
Tom he did zero prep for that call. He's just incredible. You can just say, be like, all right, Tom, go. Like, he's just such a gifted speaker. Yeah,
gifted speaker, a cornucopia of insurance information, and just a
really good guy.
A good dude.
Yeah. I've had a chance to spend some time with him, and a solid guy. So
thanks, Tom.
Yeah, appreciate it, Tom. All right. So in previous episodes, Max, we have mentioned that for story time, if you hear us telling a story, that means that that's
a failure on your part,
as
the listener.
Absolutely. So then we've got to dig in. So I was flying the Beechjet, but I was flying for this he was young. He was just a little bit older than me at the time. He had gotten this airplane. I was running the operation for him. It was kind of his first jet that he'd owned. And he was just very spur of the moment. Oh, let's go there. Let's do this. So he had a place in the Caribbean, in the Turks and Caicos, and we would go there pretty often, which in the Beechjet from Scottsdale, that's a 3-legger. So you go like here.
Is it really?
Scottsdale, Houston, Fort Lauderdale to Provo.
You can't make it to Fort Lauderdale in the Beechjet going that direction?
No.
Not even West Florida?
Well, I always fly at about 19,000 feet just so I don't want to get that high. I just get scared, so I try and keep it low. Anyways, so we were down there, and this was one of my very first trips with him down to Turks. And it was like my first time down in the Caribbean. And I talked to some people like, you don't need a handler. You don't need a flight planning company to do anything. You can just kind of do this yourself.
You hadn't done much Caribbean flying up to that point,
This is kind of
right?
my first exposure to Caribbean flying. So worked out great. Just emailed the FBO and did everything. Got down there. No problem. And I'm hanging out. I think we're at the beach one day. And he goes, hey, I need to go talk to the Prime Minister of Turks and Caicos right now and have a meeting. And then tomorrow morning, we'll go to Trinidad. And I'm like, okay.
Were you supposed to go to Trinidad? Or is that...
No, I didn't know anything about it. He goes,
right.
we'll go to Trinidad tomorrow. And he goes, so I'm going to go meet with the Prime Minister. And we're at the beach. And he goes, but I think I'm going to put a collared shirt on first, because he was in like a bathing suit. So I think he took his t-shirt off and maybe still had shorts and flip-flops on, because that's basically all he ever wore. But he goes, we'll go to Trinidad tomorrow. And I'm like, okay, Trinidad. So I'm trying to, look on the map and do the planning and figure this out. And so I'm trying to figure out the FBO situation down there, and I can't
get a hold of anyone. I'm trying to email in the Gen Deck and all of that kind of stuff. I send it off to who I think it is. No one responds. Before we went, somehow I read online somewhere, I think it was on Pro Pilot World, there was a thing where they talked about that insecticide you have to spray.
Oh,
the,
yeah, the
top
bug
of
bomb,
decent.
right.
Yeah, the bug bomb you got to do. And I'm like, I can't get this because you can only buy it from like somewhere in Australia or something. Have you ever tried it? You probably had to do this.
Yeah,
haven't
you didn't carry an empty can
Not
around?
in a beach jet. I didn't. I mean, so
That's the classic move. Oh, yeah, here's the empty can. Of course
I know. But you can't get. So I'm in Turks. I'm like, how am I going to get this thing tomorrow? At least I knew about it. So I'm like racking my brain about what to do. I shouldn't even confess this on the air. But so what I did is I went and I bought a can of bug spray, just regular bug spray from the grocery store. And I'm like, well, if I can at least show the effort that I did something.
That with $100 bill.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So I'm like, at least I could show them that I did something. So off we go. We fly, we land, and no one's there to meet us. We just kind of park where I think we should park. You know, I have no handler. This is just kind of circus. So we park on the ramp. We open the door. I think a customs agent or some equivalent of a customs agent comes out. And of course, my lead passenger in shorts and flip-flops jumps off the plane and starts running. He's got his camera out, taking pictures. Oh, this is great. And the guy's just screaming at us, get back in the plane. You know, like you have to do the whole clearance thing and everything. And so before he'd let anyone off, he wanted proof that we use the bug spray. So I'm like, yeah, here it is. And I pull out, you know, like the
can of Raid.
Yeah, exactly. It was a can of Raid. And so I pull out this can of Raid, and I'm like, yeah, of course. And he just looks at me, and he's just like, unbelievable. So he finally lets the passengers off. My boss goes off, but he brings us all into the terminal, and then I shut the airplane down and do everything, and then they drag me into some office, and this guy's yelling at me for 20 or 30 minutes. The owner of the plane is just outside, and he just thinks it is the funniest thing. And he's like videoing me like in there getting yelled at, and this guy in Spanish. And I'm just like, I'm sorry I didn't, so it ends with no money even had to change hands. And the guy gave me 2 cans of the spray.
Wow.
So that was kind of handy. But
wait, wasn't this the same? Didn't you have to be like in some sort of like apartment in a warehouse when you'd go to the Turks?
Sometimes,
like
yeah.
There was a business that he owned. I remember talking to you, and you're like stuck in and it's down by the airport. And if you've been to Provo in Turks, the worst area of the entire island is basically surrounding the airport. And then it gets nice, but it's it can be pretty rough down there.
It's a whole deal. But those were there were some really fun memories flying for that guy. But yeah, so we got down to Trinidad, and then no bug spray, but they did give us some for next time. So I thought that was nice. Shout out Trinidad. And I know
nobody
I'm
from
so
Trinidad
pumped.
is listening. Nobody cares.
They might be. And then in another show, I'll tell the story of our departure out of there because there's a lot more drama. So the lesson is order it's called Top of Descent. That's the brand name of that spray. Always make sure you have some.
But why does it say no press?
That's the return trip. I'm going to save that for next time because I forgot about the bug spray part.
All right.
Yeah. Also, it's hard to get pressed in Trinidad, so we'll tease that for next time.
It's hard to get pressed anywhere except for the U.S. All right.
Hopefully somebody learned something. Maybe that goes in the lack of professionalism column, I guess. I don't know.
Well, it's just one of those things. Everybody in the baggage compartment always has a little kit of some stuff. And I remember the beach jet, like the igniter exciter box would go out. It was just one of those parts, and it wasn't that expensive, so we'd carry a spare one of those, a can of Prist, and a Top of Descent.
I know. Well,
I carried an empty one because I would just recycle that same one.
Ooh,
oftentimes.
We cannot endorse that practice here. That's the least. Bugs in the cockpit or in the cabin are the least of everybody's problems
the
right now.
passengers are so horrified. You're like, all right, I'm going to set off this bug bomb, and you're just like, what?
I know. That's what I'm saying. But no one's worried about that right now. There's more important fish to fry, I guess. That is going to do it. It's episode 42 of the 21.5 Show, the show for professional pilots. We'd like to thank all of the folks who contributed to the show today, including John Peroyea, findapilot.com.
Our friend Tom Hauge at Wings Insurance. Links to all of their websites and information will be on the show notes.
Big shout out to Keith H. and Gregory M. for their generous donations to the show and the community at large. And
for airfare, for sending us some free snacks.
That's right. Influencing. We'll have some
snacks.
My makeup routine will be up on the socials here shortly, which is at 21.5 Podcast on Instagram if you want to watch. Actually, probably not any makeup routines, but lots of aviation license plates. They're still coming in. That's right. If you want to get in touch with us, it's info@215podcast.com. Send us your questions for flight advice. I'll have a link to that anonymous form you can submit.
And, if you want to direct the advice to somebody specific from the show, like maybe something that Ted can answer, I think would be interesting, or Roy.
Any of our folks.
Any people that are on the show that are our friends, which is most people that come on the show.
Yeah, exactly. It's the one barrier to entry. All right. Well, we'll have another show for you in a couple of weeks. But until then, remember,
flexibility is the key to air power.
See you guys.
Rock on.